Hello and welcome to It's Taboo, Let's Talk. My name is Sophia Abdul Kawi. I'm your host today, and joining us today we have a lovely set of panelists from our community. We do have Cheyenne, who's our executive assistant, who will be helping us today with the program. We do have a wonderful lineup of panelists for you. So sit back and enjoy the conversation. It's My Faith and My Mental Health. This is our third annual My Faith, My Mental Health program that we started years ago. But last year, because of COVID and everything like that, we weren't able to do the program. However, we all know this pandemic has caused a lot of stress in our communities, and also people from faith communities having difficulty to access the information or access their houses of worship or support. So we really wanted to do this program today to shed some light and some resources that can help us bring us back together. Although there's still the Omicron virus going around and other barriers for us to participate in our religious and programs. So let's have a talk. Cheyenne?
Alrighty, so without further ado, we'll begin to introduce the panelists one by one. So can we start with Rabbi Mindy Miersnick?
Hello, it's an honor to be here. Thank you, Sophia. Thank you, Sharon. It's an honor to be here. I am the president of the Council of Jewish Organizations of this borough, and I'm very happy to be here tonight to discuss mental health issues. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. So our next panelist is going to be Billy Kim, who's a chaplain at NYU.
Hi, y'all. Glad to be here, and thank you for inviting me. As Cheyenne said, I am a chaplain at NYU and also a pastor at 180 Church, which is located in downtown Manhattan. My focus is with college students and Gen Z and, bringing mental health awareness and resources.
All right. Thank you, Billy. So our next person is going to be Coach Carmen.
Blessings, everyone. My name is Coach Carmen Abercrombie. I'm the founder of Sharing the Bliss, where we take women of faith on a transformational journey to holistic health, purpose, and wealth with programs that help them to soothe their souls, heal their bodies, turn their pain into power, and their purpose into prosperity. It's an honor and a privilege for me to be here with you tonight, and I hope I can be of service.
Thank you, Coach Carmen. So our next person that we're going to have is Karina.
Guys see me? No.
No.
So great evening all. My name is Karina from Empire Blue Cross Blue Shield. It's an honor to be here. I want to say thank you to Miss Sophia always for guiding me and giving me the opportunity to come and talk to you guys. We've done events in the past. And I also want to say thank you, Rabbi Mindy, as well for your help, your trust of me coming into the community and also assisting as much as I can when it comes to health insurance. Thank you.
Thank you, Karina. So our next person is going to be Dr. Ray Brock Murray.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you guys for inviting me tonight. I want to welcome all of the viewers and express my appreciation for being able to participate in this event. Again, I'm Dr. Ray, and I'm one of the heads of the 5 Before 5 Foundation. We're a mental health nonprofit. We offer programming, consultation, and counseling for communities of color, especially communities of faith of color.
All right, thank you, Dr. Ray. So just wanted to double check, have I gone through everybody, or am I missing Reverend Dr. Kelly Farrow? You're muted.
Thank you for that. Hey, everybody. So I am Reverend Dr. Kelly Farrow. I am the president and CEO of the Kelly U. Farrow Institute for Black Preaching and Education, as well as the fearless leader for Circle of Sacred Fire, which is a preaching intensive for women of color in ministry. So I work in the realms of education, in colleges in New York and New Jersey as well. And I also serve as a mentor in the RISE National Mentoring Program for Women of Color in Ministry. And so all of these particular areas, as well as serving in 2 churches, just afford me the opportunity to be in this conversation. I also sit on the board for Columbia Presbyterian's Mental Health and Wellness Initiative. And so we as clergy try to have our hands in conversations that stretch far and past what we do in our immediate ministry to make sure that we also serve in the community. So that's where I am, and that's what I do.
Thank you, Reverend Kelly. All right. Is that everyone, or is Troya here?
I don't see her yet, but you could go ahead. We can always. Oh, she's calling me back. Hold on.
Okay, so I guess without further ado, I guess we can start with our question, our Q&A. Actually, my mistake.
Hello.
We're going to start with a poem, with a set of poetry by Naja Abdul Kawi. I'm sorry, I forgot you already. I'm so
It's okay.
sorry.
I was hiding in the background. It's all good. No harm, no foul.
So quickly introduce yourself and please bless us with your lovely poetry.
Thank you. Thank you. So my name is Naja Abdul Kawi. I'm the Arts and Culture Director for Muslim Sisters Staten Island. I also currently work as a crisis counselor, but transitioning more into like a team leader position. So I have my master's in creative art therapy, as well as in my undergrad bachelor's degree in psychology, minored in studio art, East Asian studies, and Chinese. I've worked with the homeless population, people in inpatient psych, geriatric population, as well as children with disabilities. So that's kind of my overall background as a person. And I love purple, so I'm not wearing it today, so you can't tell, but that's a little bit about me. So I am going to recite my poetry. I'm going to just move you to the back, Shy, so that way it's easier, not like standing there awkwardly. Right, and thank you so much again, Shy. She'll be back soon, guys. So you'll see my humongous face right now. So I have 2 poems for you guys. I hope you enjoy them. The first one is called Pray More. Why do we act like depression is just sadness being sensitive? Why do we act like anxiety is just worry being dramatic? Why do we act like mental health is all in your head? Oh, wait, it is, but that's not what you meant. You see, mental health for you is being an attention seeker, an actress playing her best role. You see, I know a true attention seeker. It's called my depression. It has a tendency to tag team with my anxiety. Those 2 take up more attention from me than anybody else, anything else, because they keep me in limbo. Being too drained to get out of my bed to go to work, but at the same time, I'm too worried to sleep. My mind says, well, what do you think? Oh, well, you're going to get fired anyway, so it doesn't really matter. I mean, you kind of suck at your job. You kind of had it coming. My mind then agrees. My anxiety says, well, even if you suck, like you still have to make bills. You still have to pay for them. What are you going to do? Just stay here? I mean, you can't get a doctor's note. What would it say? Diagnosis is too tired to leave bed, but too anxious to sleep. My body has become dysfunctional. You say I should take more vitamin C. Well, you see, I don't need vitamin C. I need vitamin breathe. Because the amount of energy those 2 take out of me leave very little for my lungs. You say, take a deep breath. But how can I when I'm hyperventilating? I would have died a long time ago without my asthma pump. You say you need to pray more. I say I'm quite sure I can't pray this way. I mean, what happened to tying your camel, right? My therapist is the rope and my mind is the camel. Don't get me wrong. I know prayer has worked many times. However, when I am waiting for my number to be called on an infinite line, the time it takes for my mind to say hello to its friends, depression and anxiety, the ones that have the most fun inside of my mind. So that's the first one. Little rough. It's been a minute. Sorry, guys. The next one is actually called Pray More version 2. Because I thought about it after reading this one over and trying to figure out what my second one would be. They say you should pray more. That if your mind beats itself until it is sore, all you should do is just pray more. You know, do more, give more, want to live more, but show less. Show less of the parts of yourself that you detest, the outlook of your life that is in constant state of duress. But what happens when you are in an area of distress? All you are given are words to an action without an action on your own. Prayer to the one above, but no work done from your soul, for your soul, your body, your heart, your mind. But you should just pray more. But what happens when you don't want to hear anyone? You don't want to hear anyone say anything anymore. Not the people outside of your mind or the ones trapped behind your mental cage. You're tired of hearing the same answer despite feeling deranged. You're a part of the unsane, the untamed, the unclaimed, the untrained. They say pray more suddenly will make you retrained. Sane, ones without blame. Or will they say you look the same, say the same? No hand to offer, just words to be given. A house can be built on your own, but is less of a struggle when people come and help. They come and listen. It is a given. That praying more without doing more, without speaking more, without thinking more, only leaves a builder with tools and no instructions and no support. No way to guide themselves to create a place of protection. You can't expect your camel to stay unless you tie it to the rope. You can always pray, but you and others have to put in the work because nothing is complete when 50% is all it's worth. Thank you. I see the claps in the background, and I'm assuming people are clapping virtually for me too. Thank you guys so much. Oh, you're muted, Shy. Yep.
Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you, Naja. So it's definitely something very relatable, especially for those who are in faith and also people with mental health illnesses. This is definitely a crucial topic to talk about. So without further ado, we're going to start with our Q&A. And I'm going to give everyone the freedom to start on their own before I start picking victims. I mean panelists. So just going to wait for everyone. I think that's pretty much it. Alrighty, so let's start with our first question. What is the difference between spirituality and religion? Anyone want to start? Okay, I see Coach Carmen
Yes.
saying for it. So please start this whole
Yes.
panel.
All right. Well, I was always taught to believe that spirituality and religion are two different things because religion is generally man-made and spirituality is a personal relationship with your God.
All right, thank you. Does anyone else care to step in?
Hey, Cheyenne. So I would agree with Coach Carmen from the perspective of spirituality can encompass many different faiths and religions. Certainly, of a let's say of an interfaith kind of conversation, opposed to and some people believe that there is more than one way to reach the higher power in the universe, etc. And a religion has a set of rules and orders and things that are functioning. So sometimes I think persons view religion as a little bit more structured and spirituality a little bit more fluid.
All right, thank you, Kelly. So Billy, Dr. Ray, Rabbi Mindy, does anyone care to step in before we go to the next question?
Well, religion is basically dogmatic rules are personal to the person. Spirituality are the teaching of our great religions that combine us in a greater cause to come together. That's how I view it.
Right. Thank you, Rabbi Mindy. Anybody else before we go on to the next question?
I wanted to say one thing. Yes, I think when you look at our theme for tonight, which is about mental and emotional well-being, I think there's a very important element of spirituality that is that's emotional, right? And so when we talk about religion, I think a lot of that, again, as the rabbi said, goes back to a lot of the dogma, the rules, the culture, all of those kinds of things. But spirituality refers, I think, more specifically to the internal lived experience of the person. Again, as the coach said, their connection with the creator, and so it happens more internally on a mental and emotional level. And I think that as you see throughout the theme tonight, that the spirituality is going to be that important component. We talk about how the association between emotional well-being and religion, I think a lot of ways it really points to the importance of cultivating the spirituality within the religious experience that really increases a person's emotional well-being.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Ray. So, Karina, Billy, would you like to speak on this matter? Okay, you're good. Alrighty. So, it looks like everybody is kind of in agreement to the difference between spirituality and religion. So, we can go on to the second question. How is the topic of mental health viewed within religious circles? So, I think I'm going to start with Billy.
All right. When you're, I come from a Protestant Christian background, specifically Methodist. Also, another layer to that, it's a Korean Methodist background. So there's that additional layer. And growing up, I grew up Christian. I grew up in the church, and mental health was not viewed or even talked about. I would say just in probably the last maybe like 5 to 10 years, it's been something that's been an issue, and that's something that they're and addressing and dealing with. But it's been very recent when it comes to the issue of mental health within the Protestant circle.
Anyone can jump in as they please, so no need to, raise your hand to get a cue. So please jump in. This is a conversation, so don't hesitate.
I agree with Billy. I'm Catholic, and again, it's also the way we were taught. So my parents are Italian Ecuadorian, and every Sunday was religious that we had to go in, go to church and all that. But it was never talked at home about stress, depression, none of that. There's none of that. Just recently, I get because of COVID, it's where now is where we're thinking about that. But back then, no. I used to go to Catholic school, and none of this was taught in Catholic school either. You know, it's just weird how things need to happen in order for us to touch base. It's and at the same time, I mean, I guess again, we all, I respect cultures, and I'm always intrigued to learn more because it's a sign of respect, and that was the way I was raised. At the same time, so when you bring now depression or stress, everybody's like, "Oh, what's that?" So not many people are aware what's going on, and by doing this and bringing it out to the community, there's like, "Oh, I didn't know that that existed." We say it, but we don't know that we're saying it. So it's very, very important to give out that to the community. Thank you.
Absolutely, Karina. I totally agree. I was born and raised as a Christian, and I went to church since I could remember. And there's so many things that, as an adult today, I really didn't learn in church. Things that to me was so important to live a full life. And one of them was definitely mental health. I mean, that was a taboo subject across the board, I think, especially in the African American culture in Brooklyn and Bedford Stuyvesant, where I grew up. No one talked about either somebody was just crazy, that crazy person down the street. That was it. It was never something that was a serious illness. And today, I think that it is so important, so vitally important, that regardless to what your belief system is, that you have a place where you can come and be supported by someone who understands what you're going through, but can help you in a spiritual way. Because without the spiritual component, you're just basically at the whim of the medical matrix. That's the term I use. I don't know if I can say it here, but if you don't have that spiritual support, you really don't have much of anything, as far as I'm concerned.
As I see it, mental health is a key in religion, and mental health, state of mental being, is factored into the religious discussion. The problem is although religion recognizes, Judaism recognizes mental condition as an issue, it's society allowing it not to discriminate against the mental issue or the mental challenge the person might have. So it's more of an obstacle how the world was viewing a mental state of mind. And that view many times distorted the lessons of religion to treat it, to understand it, and to deal with it. But from a true religion analysis, mental state, mental health, how people feel are important. It's the mores of society that many times interfered with having that discussion, unfortunately. In COVID, who's not affected spiritually, emotionally, financially, economically? All the leads kicked in. And when all the leads kicked in, because of the reality, the mental well-being also became an issue and is being focused on.
Hey, Cheyenne. So, I mean, previously, yes, I grew up in the Black church, and so typically, Black culture, Black church, we didn't talk about mental health. Um, Typically, what you learned was what goes on in his house stays in his house, those kind of things, and it really caused a lot of oppression. But today, I find it to be different, and not just because of COVID, but COVID might have certainly brought it to light. So, I have a number of friends across a lot of different industry backgrounds, but certainly the clergy. So a group of Black women clergy friends that I have, we've talked a lot about mindfulness. We've talked a lot about when churches open back up, having, you know, ministries that now support the overall person in the church itself, right? But also it needs to be taught in the individual space so persons don't feel like it is problematic to say I suffer with anxiety or I didn't have anxiety before, because the transparency, the authenticity to live into that is what's difficult. Also, it's not only society saying you quote unquote look or act crazy, it's also self-identification and introspection, right? To say that I get worried sometimes, and then being able to share that with a friend of yours or someone else, and then feel a sense of community and support in that area. So that's growing. So me and a girlfriend of mine, in November, we did a book called The Four Agreements, and we did what we called a reader circle. And so the Four Agreements, a Toltec cultural background book, but the agreements, while they look simple and read simply, they're fairly difficult. Long story short, in the conversation, a number of things came up on why people take things personally, or why you assume certain things. And some of it had to do with self-doubt and self-esteem and mental concerns. And so we discovered from that conversation that there were a number of mental issues, emotional issues, concerns, that challenges, I like the word challenges, that persons had. And so then it opened up to do another reader circle coming up this spring with Brene Brown's book, The Gifts of Imperfection, right? So when we were able to live into and learn how to be wholehearted with ourselves, whether we struggle with any number of things, not being ashamed of that can help us be released from how that's perceived and how that's received. So, and if the question is how is the topic of mental health viewed in religious circles, it is changing. It is a landscape that is evolving and moving. And there are some clergy, such as myself, that are on the forefront of doing that in very nuanced and authentic and transparent ways for those who we serve with.
Amen.
Oh, excuse me. I just want to throw in a few things just about the Muslim community too, and I wonder for all of the rest of the panelists if you've seen the same parallels in your respective communities, which is a number of things. But one of the things that sticks out for me, coming from a psychology background, is that as the field of psychology became more diverse, and you find more people who are invested in their faiths, studying psychology, they're bringing it back to their communities, to their religious leaders, making themselves access to the community, raising awareness of the issues. But on top of that, you have the religious leaders actually encountering a lot more mental and emotional health issues. And so that it starts to rise to the level where it's undeniable. You know, at a certain point, we've kind of got to face the reality of it. And so that has, at least in the Muslim community, made it something that's more widely known, more widely talked about, and something that there are many forces moving to try to address for all of the people that are in need. There's still a certain amount of taboo around it. I think taboo in the Muslim community is not the biggest issue. The biggest issue is usually access. You know, like, can I actually find someone who understands my faith, and I can connect to, and you know, I can afford all of those kinds of things. And there's a lot of work around like actually sitting and talking to, doing consultation with community leaders. And again, I put this out to the rest of the panelists too. If you've seen that dynamic and whether or not you feel like that's contributed significantly to the shift that I would say each of us has seen in our communities.
I definitely see that there's a great need for the leaders, the spiritual leaders, to have special support. I believe I call it nurturing the nurturers. And thank God, as you said, that there's a lot of professionals who are faith-based who are coming into the churches and opening up the dialogue. But I know for myself, for many years, that's been one of my major focuses, and that was to support the leaders, the leaders that are teaching and having to carry the burden, and they don't have anyone else they can't tell their church what they're going through. They can't tell the congregation the stress that they're carrying. And so that's one of the reasons why I have a large number of pastors and ministers who are a part of the work that I do. And it's very rewarding because I know I couldn't imagine having to give out every day and not have somebody else to talk to about what I'm dealing with. And really, it starts from the top. So if the top isn't strong emotionally, it's going to show and it's going to trickle down. And it's just going to be a broken situation.
Thank you so much for speaking on this. As someone who is ironically agnostic, so coming from a Christian household, but agnostic, finding like having conversations with those of different faiths, kind of talking about mental health and just the disparity in basically it's taboo in some instances when you talk about mental health, where it's like, okay, I have depression or I have anxiety, but my family doesn't understand it, or I think my church or the masjid is not going to understand it. It's a commonality that I've come to realize as I'm having more of these conversations. So I find that this is uplifting to see that that there's an evolution going on within the clergy and within religious circles. So without further ado, we're going to go on to the next question. Have you had encounters with someone in a mental health crisis? And if so, how did you approach it? And I guess we can start with Coach Carmen. I see you nodding.
I know. I didn't want to be the first to say anything, but yes, that's a big one for me. Unfortunately, I lost my sister Darlene as a result of mental health, and actually, I'm the sole survivor of a family of 6. So all of my siblings and my parents passed away way too early, and my mom was 40, so my sister, she had just turned 60, and she had 15 years of anxiety attacks, and she was on medication after medication after medication, and unfortunately the medication ultimately took her life. And it wasn't suicide, it was her trying to get off the medication, and they took her off prematurely. My sister was a teacher here on Staten Island, the first Black teacher at PS14. For me, it was very hard because before she started to take the medication, I really just wanted her to do some things that I felt that she could do first. So I was constantly encouraging her to really focus on the spiritual piece, because it was based on fear, and fear and faith cannot coexist. So until she was able to just control that fear, I knew she would spiral down the medical matrix rabbit hole. And so what I would do after years of supporting her as best I could, it was hard because the medication was, I was losing her because of the medication. She was no longer herself. But what I could get from her, the sparks of her that was still there, I would just try to encourage her to think about the future, which is one of the things I encourage people in the work that I do. You have to have a dream board, have something that connects you to the life that you want. So you're not totally engaged in your present day existence. And that's a difficult thing because the mind doesn't want to go there. It wants to stay stuck where it is. But it's extremely important to look for the light, and to look and to see your future and to plan your future. And even today, we have to plan our future, even though it doesn't look really good. If you don't have something to look forward to, you're not going to be able to fight, because you won't have anything to fight for.
Thank you for sharing that, and I'm sorry for your loss, Carmen. Dr. Ray, since you are someone who is in the mental health field, have you encountered someone that was in crisis? And if so, how did you approach it?
Yeah, a lot, unfortunately. I think when somebody is in crisis, what you want to try to do is you want to try to slow them down as much as you can. And part of that slowing the person down is really by listening to them, right? Like, hear the experience, let them talk through what they're going through. Because part of that is, it's almost like they're filling up with air, they're welling up with a lot of emotion. And so you really, really have to listen and pay attention and reassure and open the space for them. I give the example a lot with the people that I work with. In Islam, we have the tradition of hadith, and the hadith, it's all of the sayings and actions of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And I say to people all the time, have you ever heard a hadith where the person says a man came to the Prophet and started to explain his situation, and the Prophet interrupted him? You never hear this. Anyone who came with any issue, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he sat and he listened to the person. And when he responded, oftentimes people would come to him with the same issues, and each person would get a different response, not because he doesn't know what he's talking about, but because he's addressing the same issue, but with a different person in a different situation. And so, these keys are very, very important to try to tap into what are you hearing about what this person needs in the moment. And so when you're talking about somebody being in crisis, it's not always about trying to even resolve the crisis, but listening for cues about what they're needing from you in this moment. And again, the last example that I give is even just asking someone, what can I do? What do you have any idea what you need that I can give to you in this moment or do for you in this moment? Um, and then the other part of that is the idea when you look at a lot of times people who are frustrated or disappointed with their loved ones in these moments of crisis, what's the number one complaint and the language that you hear around it, which is, you weren't there. When I needed you, you weren't there. And so one of the most important things relative to managing someone who's dealing with a crisis is just allowing yourself to be present with them and not underestimating the value of what that holds for them.
Thank you, Dr. Ray.
Mhm.
It's definitely not easy when encountering anyone in a crisis, especially when they're not grounded in the moment. And grounding is definitely one of the biggest things. And showing them how to breathe,
Yep.
because people tend to forget to breathe when they're in the moment. So just coaching them through it and being there is definitely a crucial point in terms of bringing them back to the present. So before we go into the next question, Karina, Billy, Reverend Kelly, do you want to speak on this, or are you good?
Um, Again, for myself, especially how things are happening right now in this world, you have to really be careful because anybody nowadays, they have guns, weapons, and all that. I mean, there's a big rise of that. So, me personally, to protect myself, I, walk away. Yeah, there was a couple of times where I've, walking towards my event or just going home, I've seen people try to approach to me, and of course I get scared, so I run. So if you try to talk to somebody who's not there to have a solid conversation, it's hard. So when you asked that question, I was like, wow, how? Before the pandemic, I was working in Jamaica Avenue, and we were having an event, and there was a gentleman who I think he had uh there was something about him that he was just standing and he just fell asleep right in front of the table. And again, you don't know if this guy had a weapon or what he could do. What I did is I left it alone. I let him, do what he had to do. He got up, he looked at me, he smiled, and the table setup that I had, he just threw everything on the floor. Now, smart of me, I let him be. I'm not going to engage it because you don't know what he has with him. He kept on moving. I picked up. There's a lot of that right now. So it's really, really hard how to approach. Like there's one thing about me that not many people know. I also work for the NYPD. I'm an auxiliary lieutenant at the 7-9 precinct. That's Best Die. And the slogan in Best Die is do or die. Okay, and to be quite frank with you, I'm out on the streets right now because of what's been happening with the cops. Now they're teaching us the auxiliaries, how to approach people. Remember, we don't carry guns. We only have a baton and we have a radio. So, what they say, if you see something, say something. Don't be a hero because at the end of the day, we have to come home to our families. So, the same thing, dressed as an empire. I see stuff, I don't say nothing. I approach it to the person and say, hey, this person needs help. Because you don't know. You have to be careful. We're not superwomans or supermans. We need to get home to our family. Right now it's really bad out there, guys, that you're even afraid to go outside of your house. So again, that's me. That's personally me. Everybody has the opinions, and I respect everybody's opinion. But for me, I just call in a bus. That's a terminology for the ambulance for NYPD. where they know what to do, of how to even grab a person, because everybody has cameras nowadays. So you have to be careful. You try to help, you might get involved, you might get hurt. So that's me personally. Thanks.
Yes. Cheyenne, can I just interject really quickly? One, you just reminded me of something, Katrina, when you said what you said. But I was talking to a friend who told me someone came up to her with a dog because she was just parked. She was turning her car and she had to go into his driveway a little bit, and he came out of his house with his dog barking and running up to her. And I was telling her that whenever you're in a situation like that, or even if you go into a store and there's some bad energy, you can feel. Lots of times you get the hair that stands in the back of your neck, something's not right. And what I told her to do, and what I do, is I just put my hands in prayer position and I look at the person and I just bow. I just do that too. And I find that really makes a big difference. Like, I'll just bow and allow God's light to just shine bright enough to neutralize the situation. It seems to always work. I mean, it's not always good to give somebody eye contact, but if you feel that you need to do that, you can. But if not, just bow and put your hands like that if you see somebody has some really crazy energy, and they usually will calm down, I find.
I've also learned of a friend of mine. He's always on the street, and he tells me, he's like, when I see somebody acting like that, and it's pretty weird how he said, he goes, I'll act the same, because
That's the opposite.
seriously, they act the same. So there's like, okay, he's one of us, I won't bug him type. It's funny and it's pretty messed up to say, but that's how he survives. Why? Because what he does is he drives a Tropicana route, and the areas that he goes, they're not the safest. Him being a man, he fears for himself. He goes, I don't want to be carrying a bat or something. No. So he goes to these areas that are really, really bad. And sometimes he be act like he's one of them. And like I said, it's really, really sad what's going on. And look what happened with the shooting with those two officers. The mother called in for the son, not knowing that he had this big gun and all that. And look what happened. Look.
So, Reverend Troya, do you want to say anything?
Sure. I encounter people with crisis at least once a day, and I wouldn't use the word mental health crisis. I think it's not healthy to view it from the perspective of the words mental health. I see human beings in crisis as a result of what goes on around them, and this is kind of an answer to both the first and the second question. In the tradition I was raised, and what I believe is that God wants for us the fullness of life, each and every person. But there are circumstances, environment, and structures that do not create human fullness, and in fact work against human fullness in sometimes very violent ways. The example of the police officers responding is one kind of violence, but there's institutional violence where people's perceptions of themselves are deeply affected because of how society has treated them or their families or their communities because of institutional violence. And so people find themselves in situations that are beyond their control. And behavioral health is about how we react to what is happening in our world around us. So what's most important is, first of all, that a person or persons that are experiencing a human crisis, having everything thrown out of their apartment and being evicted illegally, and seeing their wedding album on the curb, their precious possessions, They're things passed on from their great grandmothers, thrown out. People who experienced the flood of Ida and lost everything in their apartments, or who came near to drowning. People who lost their loved ones in COVID, especially those that didn't have health insurance and their loved ones never made it past the emergency room to ICU. Those kind of situations create the context for human crisis. And it's very important not only to be able to work to heal the person or to involve that person in the process of healing, but to also recognize that the world around them needs to be healed as well, and things need to be set right so that people are not placed in those circumstances of great trauma. Much of mental health treatment these days revolves around the belief that trauma creates much of the human crisis that people experience. And trauma that comes from institutional violence, from poverty, from homelessness, from dire hunger, from insecurity of finance and home and family and the separation of family, all of that has to be dealt with. That's the level of trauma, sexual trauma, violence in all forms, before we can actually get to the core of how people can heal and how they can learn to deal with the trauma around them, but also the responsibility for us as faith leaders to also deal with those traumatic circumstances by healing the world and making it right for all people.
Thank you, Reverend Troya. So we're going to go on to the next question. Can spirituality be helpful during mental illness? And if so, how? So I guess I'm going to pick. So I'm going to pick Billy.
Can spirituality be helpful during mental illness? Like, are you trying to, is it meaning like you're diagnosed with a mental illness, or you're like, can you clarify, Cheyenne?
So this can be across the spectrum. So whether you're undiagnosed, underdiagnosed, or officially diagnosed with a mental illness, can that act of spirituality, whatever form it is, be helpful in terms of approaching someone with it?
Okay, yeah. I honestly, if you're talking about a broad spectrum, I think spirituality absolutely helps, because we're in the hope business, and anybody that feels broken, whether mentally or spiritually, emotionally, that's where religion, or is really all about, to show hope in the spaces where we have no control over. And I think that's so very important, especially as clergy, as spiritual leaders, as representations of a higher being, whoever we call. I think that's very vital for anybody, including ourselves, that are struggling to overcome, or struggling to believe that there's more. And I believe holding on to that hope, and that thread of hope, and believing that, especially in the Christian religion, that there is wholeness at the end of the day. I think that's very, very important, because that helps us to move on daily, to walk in that mercy and that grace of what you believe that has been given to us each and every day, and walk in that daily sustenance in that walk. Whether we fail or not, failing forward and fighting for another day, believing that there's inherent value and worth, I believe that can be incredibly helpful, because, again, at the end of the day, it shows that there's someone that actually cares for us in the moments where we might be caught up in our own selves and our own feelings and our own emotions and messages and internal and maladaptive behaviors or thoughts. There's an anchor to hold on to, and I think that's so vital and so important.
Hey, Cheyenne. Yeah, I agree. I am in agreement with. I'm sorry, my camera's off, you guys. I just have severe technical difficulties. The storm passing through where I am. Yes, I believe it can, because it helps build resilience. So there is a study that shows that persons who have some sort of spiritual foundation or faith background, they are more than likely to be able to come through mental challenges, emotional challenges, than someone who does not, simply because it helps build resilience. And vulnerability is couched in that, along with removal of shame is couched in that. And there are a lot of people out here doing the work about resilience, shame, and vulnerability so that we can understand those emotions better and how we can better support persons who have gone with that, who go through life with that rather. So spirituality, faith-based organizations, programming, all of those are a part of a supportive community to get persons from point A to point B. Grief as well, right? And so, being very transparent, I lost my grandmother in December. We were together 46 years. I had my grandmother for a long time. And so I'm in a space of grief. And so it's been very challenging to just get up every morning because I've been sad or because I've been overwhelmed, because there are a lot of emotions running on the same day, anger, frustration. But it has been my faith that's given me resilience, the hope. I heard Reverend Kim say we're in the hope business. The hope of things to come is what spurs me on. And so I don't think if I had the hope, and we're not even talking about hope mixed with faith. We're just talking about hope. The hope that brighter days are come, the hope that I can get up in the morning, the hope that, as the scriptures say, joy comes in the morning, the hope that bad things don't last always. I feel the black church in me right now. I'm just saying, it helps me get up in the morning, and so the resilience of that gives me fervor and gives me a place where I don't feel like I'm defeated because in my grief I am struggling emotionally.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Reverend.
I would like to add to that. You know, and from the Islamic perspective, um, the idea of meaning making in psychology is very important, right? What is the meaning behind what I'm going through? Why
Yes.
is God willed it into my life?
Mm-hmm.
What am I supposed to do with it? How am I supposed to learn or grow? How is overcoming it going to make me in some ways mentally, emotionally, spiritually stronger? And so that's very important, for imagining everyone. But one of the ways that I try to help people with this is, and I meant to mention this earlier when we started. I think when you have people from our religious backgrounds who study psychology and then go home, when we read our religious texts, we're able to pull out all of the mental and emotional kind of material that it's always been there, but for some reason we've just kind of overlooked it. As our
Mm-hmm.
different communities have, we tend to focus on different things and make priorities of one element of the text or the other. And
Mm-hmm.
so one of the things that I try to do, and I want to give this example, I myself have been Muslim for maybe almost 14 years. And so one of the things that I do to explain to people, because I'm often talking to people who've been Muslim their entire lives, I talk to them about the story of Jacob and his son Joseph, which is a story of, family hardship, betrayal, jealousy, and then eventually redemption and faith. And when I go through the story with everyone with these elements in mind, I ask, how many people, you've been Muslim your whole life? I have not. You've been Muslim your whole life. How many times have you read this story? And people say, all the time. And then I ask them, how many times did you see this in it? And none of them pull that out. And I think in general, when you talk about people that are going through, any kind of mental health difficulty, it doesn't have to be a diagnosis, but just some emotional distress, even from their day-to-day lives and trauma work, family relationships, all of those things. Being able to point to those things is very important because in Islam, um, you know, our goal is to do what makes God happy and to do what pleases Him and to earn His favor, to try to earn forgiveness and to get closer to Him in those kinds of ways. And so one of the central components of that is following the footsteps of the prophet. And so it's very helpful a lot of times when people are going through something to be able to tell a story of a prophet. I just gave a sermon last Friday, and I talked about Moses, alayhi salam, when God commanded Moses to go to Pharaoh. Moses asked God, help me with my speech impediment. And the Quran, Allah describes him as having a speech impediment. And he says, help me with that and send my brother Aaron with me to strengthen me. And so I use that to say to the people, don't we all have insecurities and self doubt and all of these kinds of struggles? And you use the religious text to say, let us follow the example of Moses in this instance, where we didn't give in to the challenge because of our fear about our shortcomings. Rather, he sought out God's assistance so that he could face it more firmly. And I think a lot of times giving people this context, um, even the emotional stories of breaking down, Jacob, he lost his sight. God discusses that Jacob lost his sight because he was suppressing his grief over the loss of Joseph. And so we give people room to grieve. Would you ever say that Jacob didn't trust God and have faith in God and all of those things? No one would ever say that. But then when we feel something or we struggle with an emotion, where do I really believe? Do I really have faith? We start to ask ourselves these religiously existential questions. In this context, I see a few people are reacting to it. I'd love to hear what you have to say. That context really helps people spiritually give themselves room.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Myself, I am a super radical woman of faith, like radical. So, because I am radical, I personally cannot imagine trying to get help with a mental illness without getting spiritual help. Because for me, it all starts in the spirit realm anyway. For me, it's about getting to the root of what's causing the bad fruit. And for me, that root is generally a soul issue. And for you to heal that soul issue, it's going to take more than medication. It's going to take a spiritual healing. I believe that mental illness is like any other illness. It's an illness. With spirit, soul, and body, illness is illness. So to have a mental illness and not get to the root of it spiritually, and that's the only way you're going to truly get to the root spiritually, by seeking your higher power and using the tools that he's given you. For me, that's speaking to the mountain. You got to talk to yourself. You have to talk to the situation. You have to do the total opposite of what is. And that's what I tell anyone that's going through some mental oppression. It's like you have to do the opposite, because it's energy, it's vibration too. And we fall into a deep, dark vibrational frequency when we are going through things, and it continues to get built, it builds up and becomes from depression to oppression. And many times that opens the door to mental illness. And I know it's a lot of controversy there, because many people, there's a chemical imbalance. All of that still, I don't care what it is, it can be healed if you are willing to do the spiritual work.
Can I say something, Cheyenne? Is that okay? Dr. Ray, I want to go back to you, what you were saying, because I think that was, bringing to light the psychological issues, or even the maladaptive thoughts, or emotional distress within the scriptures, is illuminated, and I think that's very important. Within our church about 2 years ago, we did a series called CBT and Faith, and we went through all the thoughts, and you could just see through these prophets and leaders and even spiritual giants that we thought were spiritual giants. We're like, oh man, they're just as broken as us, and there just brings a sense of humanity and a depth of closeness, where then you realize how God meets them. And sometimes there's radical, miraculous healings that Coach Carmen, you were talking about, but sometimes they just live with the limp, right? They just walked in brokenness. But what's amazing is that in both ends, there's still a message of hope and renewal that they keep pressing on and persevering, as Reverend Kelly Farrell was talking about. And I think that's what's so important. And I think for us as religious leaders, and as the audience is hearing, I think that's what we're trying to like uplift and advocate, is that whatever religious context that you're in or spiritual context that you're in, it's a lot more closer, and your higher being or God is a lot more closer than you think and cares about you more than you could imagine. And I mean, that's something that I want to leave behind because I might have to go in the next 5 to 10 minutes. But Dr. Ray, I'm so glad you talked about that, because I'm like, when I listened, I was like, yeah, that's definitely true. You know, the intricacies in the book, because I don't know, I saw Encanto like just recently too, and I think that vibes with that too. Just the intergenerational brokenness, and we're just trying to hide it, and because we're from deep ethnic backgrounds, especially Asian backgrounds, we don't want to talk about that stuff. My parents my parents just like had to. They went to the Korean War. They don't want to deal with that. They just wanted to survive. But to see that brokenness and to relate it and to understand there is also a psychological and emotional layer to it, I think that's so freeing in so many ways. And so I want to leave that behind. I don't want to go rambling on too long.
But look, thank you, Reverend Kim, for bringing in Encanto, because I have a whole sermon series now behind Encanto. Encanto, if you ain't seen Encanto, everyone needs to see Encanto. The kids, the intergenerational folk, everybody. Because the story in itself, it is quite revelatory across the generation, across the cultural, because we always feel like because folk are in particular cultural backgrounds that we don't have commonality and hurt. And I hear Reverend Terry said trauma, and trauma being the big force to why people are in the condition that they tend to be in, right? And so, yes, the revelatory and revelation of scripture, movies like Encanto, I always feel like personally that God speaks to me in movies. And so when I saw Encanto, I was just excited about that. Because there is any number of ways. I feel like this: if God can speak to the donkey, then God can speak to any one of us. Similar to what Coach Terry was, Coach Carmen is saying. And so what I appreciate about this conversation, because I might have to go too, because the internet is just driving me crazy. However, I appreciate you guys bringing together this conversation, because the collectiveness of mind proves exactly what we're all talking about, right? You can be and work and serve in your respective communities, but there is still commonality in the work that we're doing. And the goal is to heal people. And I appreciate that.
Amen.
Thank you. Reverend Troya, is there any thoughts on this matter?
So I want to reframe your question.
Yes, go right ahead.
Can be helpful to mental health, not just to mental illness, but to mental health. That person's spiritual practice, one would hope, would be moving a person towards wholeness and towards serenity. There's a book out called, Can an Atheist Follow the 12 Steps? And the answer is yes, because the 12 steps are a spiritual movement. They're not a religious movement. And I want to separate out spirituality from religion, or from what we understand as religion, because spirituality is really about the groundedness of the person in relationship to the world around them. And we can believe that world was created by God. We could use the word higher power. My partner of 20 years was an avid atheist, but a very spiritual person. And we need to look towards the disciplines, and I use that word in the sense of the rhythms of life that we allow ourselves to be a part of, in order to bring us to inner peace and acceptance and serenity and strength that allow us to sleep in peace and rise for the next morning. Those practices can be many. They can be poetry and nature and deep friendship, and it could be prayer, it could be meditation, it could be contemplation. It can come from scriptures, it can come from poetry, it can come from what we write on paper, it can come from what we speak in our hearts to ourselves, or what utters from our lips to others. But that we are spiritual beings in this world, that is clear. and human wholeness includes that spiritual perspective of ourselves, and indeed that's fierce spirituality inside ourselves can actually be a part of our healing.
Thank you so much for everyone to be speaking on this. Again, this is extremely important, just talking about spirituality, religion, and just mental health as a whole. It's complicated. And when you add on to the layers of our culture, our ethnicity, even to how we identify in other labels, it becomes complicated. And it becomes a ball of, it's like a tangled ball of yarn, basically. You're trying to untangle it and you're trying to find all these knots, and it's how do you undo it? And a lot of it is, it takes help and being open and the willingness to accept and acknowledge that help is something that you need and something that we need as people. So without further ado, we're going to try to get through a couple more questions just so we can make sure we get through it. How has COVID-19 pandemic affected resources within religious spaces? So I would like to start with Reverend Troya for this one, followed by Kelly Farrow.
Well, I'm not sure I totally understand the question. What do you mean by resources?
So in some congregations, a number of them have had to close in some instances. So what other methods have you used in terms of reaching out to people, in terms of still doing the Hope's work?
Gotcha. Okay. Gotcha. So, blessed be the God who created Zoom. It's a wonderful tool.
Yes.
And I can't say enough about how magnificent it has been for us in our congregation. People join us from all over the country to pray with us. And we are welcoming people into our congregation who have never stepped foot into our neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
And we have ordained people by Zoom. It's just magnificent that we're open up to new relationships. One of the most powerful things that I've experienced in Zoom church, which I distinguish from Pew Church, and in Zoom church we share communion. But what's so moving is that when people are sitting at their kitchen table with their spouse or their children, their loved ones, and they break the bread and they share the cup and they say to each other the words that I would say: take and eat, take and drink. But they're saying it to each other. So I invite them, I say, pick up this bread, pick up that cup, and say to the person you love who is next to you. And it creates the context of intimate community where we are ministering to each other. And I'm not the center of attention. And that has just been a magnificent gift. We do a hybrid church now. We have Zoom and Pew. And I am not a technical genius. It's one of my disabilities. So sometimes I have to turn to the computer and look and wave, and sometimes I'm talking to the people inside, and sometimes I have to say, Zoom church, please stand. Zoom church, please pay attention, and Pew church, please stand. So I get my Zooms and my Pews mixed up, but we are blessed with a new way of communicating with each other, and for that I am grateful. And in our ministry, while we don't have a lot of people coming into the sanctuary, we have a dementia ministry where we minister both to caregivers and to people living with profound memory loss. Instead of them gathering with us, which would be really a danger to elderly people in this point of COVID, we go to their houses and we bring them baskets every month to remember them. And we pray with them, both on Zoom, on the phone, and at their door. And that's another way of manifesting human relationship, and really blessed for the level of creativity that God places inside us to allow us to continue to love others in new ways with COVID.
Beautiful.
So, Kelly or Billy, since I know both of you are going to have to go soon, do either of you wish to speak on this?
Yeah, I'll go real quick. I've had a mixed experience with the situation. As much as I love Zoom, I also hate it too as an extrovert, and maybe that's part of the reason. And I've also seen in terms of uh, the religious space, yes, I think there's a sense of connectedness and innovation that Zoom has created. But I think the distance and the isolation is also a revelation of the need for to actually really meet together. I think there's something about physically meeting together and engaging together, that sense of accountability or the sense of presence is, I think, that's very very keen and important that we took for granted in the past. And I think that's why, in Hebrews, they talk about, to spur one another, do not give up meeting one another, especially in times of persecution. And I know it's very different because it's a very mental health struggle and crisis that's going on, and a public health emergency. But I think as people get vaccinated, as people get boosters, as people go forward to those things, of course, as our religion allows it or our dogma allows it, I think there's something important that we come together in that actually brings a sense of better mental wellness and dealing with and actually addressing the core issues of the loneliness epidemic that we feel, because this loneliness isolation epidemic is not the cause is not a cause because of COVID. It was there before it just exaggerated the issue, and I think revealing that kind of really shows what we can actually tackle as religious leaders of what's actually problematic in our culture right now.
All right.
Hey
Reverend.
everyone. So yeah, sorry. So I have my mixed feelings about virtual church also. But the nice part about it is that I work with a team that actually, sorry for the noise in the background. I work with a team that has been very innovative in getting church to people in different ways. So I serve at a church in Brooklyn called the Double Love Experience Church, and most of the pandemic we've been virtual because when we decided to go to weekly services, that's when the pandemic hit pretty strong, and so we've had to find new and innovative ways to engage people. So we have like, if you go to DLE's Facebook page, you'll see group led Bible study or certainly be a virtual because that's how we use this we utilize that particular space. In-person worship is only like an hour 15 minutes. We have a book drive, we have any number of surely more contemporary ways of engaging people in virtual spaces. Then when we can get together, we certainly do a social distance, we certainly do it masked up. The pandemic overall, as far as how it's affected our resources. I mean, most people, since they've been laid off or they lost their jobs, and that certainly affects the income and the income as it relates to the financial support of the church. But the most valuable asset that we have and resource that we have that we will always have is people. And so people show up and volunteer, they show up with their ideas, they show up with their hands and their minds and their hearts. And that's how we get ministry going today. It is certainly a little bit different. Is I preach is different preaching to an empty sanctuary, empty church, because you're used to someone saying amen or ouch or something. So you getting used to the various contexts in which the pandemic has left you in this kind of lull. However, the lull has produced a good amount of, hopefully for some people it is producing, but for us it certainly has produced a good amount of innovation. How can we still do ministry in this situation, in this pandemic life, in these pandemic streets, without all the resources that we had before? Because for me, honestly, I feel like we were in abundance of resources and weren't doing a thing.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just me. So now we had to be pushed to do it a little bit differently. Lord help us. We are doing some really amazing things. And so that's my bittersweetness about the pandemic. Like, I hate the fact that we have to deal with this. There's no control and et cetera, over how things are going to go. However, the innovation, the creativity of the hearts and minds and souls of people has blessed me tremendously. And so I want to thank you all for this experience and signing on and having the conversation. And hopefully, Cheyenne, I'll get to see you soon.
Definitely will see you soon. Take care.
All right.
All right, Dr. Ray, Coach Carmen, would you like to speak on how this has affected you in these spaces?
Really, just very briefly, I think we've had to make sure that we're reaching out to people more. Because as you get much more of an influx of people who are reaching out to you by phone and email and things like that, whereas otherwise you would see them in person, and it makes it easier to sit with them, give them space, talk to them, help them get connected with services. Now I was always getting like 100 text messages a day, but now it's so much more, and it can be easier. We talk about this pandemic of like loneliness, but that really compounds someone who's lonely and they're reaching out and they're slipping through the cracks because there's such an influx of, again, this kind of remote approaches to connecting to people, emails and phone calls, text messages, that they kind of feel lost or kind of left to the side because there's so many fires one person can put out. And I think that has been the biggest challenge.
Yeah.
I do want to say I'm going to stick around for at least one more question because I myself have an appointment coming up in a few minutes too.
Okay. Cheyenne, you're muted.
Thank you.
You're
Forgot I
welcome.
was muted. So, well, for the most part, we pretty much have gotten through the majority of our questions. If there's any final thoughts, any comments that you all wish to have, now is the moment to do so. But I want to say, on behalf of Muslim Sisters of Staten Island, Inc., thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us and to talk about these issues and just how important it truly is to have an interfaith conversation.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So I'd like to just end with Project Hospitality, which is an interfaith effort, has a team of people called Project Hope that are funded specifically and trained to provide for the mental health and emotional support of people during this time of COVID, dealing with issues such as isolation, bereavement, illness. And we invite anyone who feels that they would like to talk with someone or would like to know about resources to call 718 608 7900. 718 608 7900. It is confidential. We don't take any names. We can help point people to whatever resources they need, including financial resources during this time of COVID. And we invite people to call the Project Hope team. And we're happy to go anywhere to do groups as well as individual counseling and to help people in this time of stress. And also for people that look towards wellness in their own lives and the struggle for emotional balance, we invite people to visit our wellness center, 718 273 8409. 718 273 8409. And that wellness center is located at 14 Slauson Terrace off of Bay Street within walking distance of the ferry. The Project Hospitality Wellness Center. Thank you.
Okay. And Cheyenne, I would like to make sure that I share the gift that I have for anyone who would like to have some meditation that they can use to lift themselves up, to raise their frequency, to really start to manifest what they're believing for. Because again, you have to have something to hold on to, something to keep you motivated and to keep you lifted up above the muck and the mire of this matrix, and so the gift is, I think it's linked. I don't know, Cheyenne, if it's visible for the guests to receive it, but I put the link there. And I also have my office number that I would love to share for anyone who would like to have a complimentary health and wellness consultation and an assessment. And my office is 718-273-9772. 718-273-9772. And hopefully you'll be able to get that link for my meditation that I have for you all. She's looking.
I just found the link.
Yay! Awesome.
Yes, again, on behalf of Missy, I thank all of you, Dr. Ray, Coach Carmen, Reverend Troya, Chaplain Billy Kim, Rabbi Mendy, Karina, basically Reverend Kelly. Basically, thank you everybody for speaking tonight. It is deeply appreciated and it's a very humbling experience. And on that note, this concludes our Let's Taboo, Let's Talk.
Thank you so much. Peace to everyone.
God bless you.